I met Rabbi Berkman in Israel during our year in Israel, and then we truly came to know each other best as we were roommates in the former Soviet Union for the week of Passover. We signed up for a trip while we were living in Israel to go help people who were living in the former Soviet Union to celebrate Passover, in large part because the generations prior hadn't had the freedom to do so, and they didn't really know what to do. And so we boarded a plane, and we got the lucky draw by far. Not only because we could say it would be nice if I said we got the lucky draw because that's where we were paired up as roommates, and we became friends who now talk almost every day. But we really got the lucky draw because we got St. Petersburg. So some people were sent to Uzbekistan or something. Everybody wanted to go to St. Petersburg, and somehow we got to go to St. Petersburg, which is a beautiful city, and we had a wonderful time there teaching people about Passover and getting to know each other, and we've been dear friends ever since. And like the Winston family, we've watched each other's families grow. Part of what makes Danny unique as a rabbi in America is that he did not grow up in America, he grew up in London. And he was raised not only by a British father, as you would expect, but by an Israeli mother. And so he has family around the world. He's been very involved with the World Union for Progressive Judaism, and he now serves a congregation just outside of Boston. But Danny Rabbi Berkman, I should say, has always remained very much in touch with what is happening in the world, and has always been my go-to person to try to understand. When we try to reach beyond our echo chambers and our little village here to understand what world Jewry is doing, his perspective has always been one that I've relied on. And so I thought tonight it would be great to ask him to share that perspective with us in the place that we are in our world today. So it's a great honor to invite Rabbi Berkman to share our bima.
Shabbat Shalom. It is such a joy to be with you all this evening. I have live streamed services and seen Rabbi Brown and Cantor Kathy leading from this bima, but I was never sure of who was actually joining in with them in prayer and song. And so it's lovely to be able to see all of your faces and be with you this weekend, and especially the immense joy of celebrating Hannah becoming a bat mitzvah. I'm thrilled that I can be here. When Rabbi Brown asked me, or more accurately told me, that I would be preaching this evening, he also shared the subject that he wanted me to talk about and told me that Temple Israel practice is for sermons of 30 minutes or so. So I hope you're sitting comfortably. I was tempted to just go off script and tell you about Rabbi Brown at rabbinic school, but maybe we can chat at the Oneg about that. As he mentioned, we got to know each other in Israel and the former Soviet Union, and I do remember a much younger Rabbi Brown trying to communicate with the local Russian Jewish community. It wasn't easy. We shared no common language. Their English was limited and our Russian was non-existent. But as you can imagine, with his broad smile and the warmth that he emanates, he was able to bond with that community without either side understanding a word of what they were actually saying. At that time, 17 years ago, there was a need for rabbinic students from America studying in Israel to go to Russia to support them in celebrating Passover. Today, they have their own Reform Rabbinical School, and they are nurturing homegrown leaders to serve these communities. So when you ask, what's the state of world Jewry today? On the one hand, it's good, and on the other hand, it's not so good. So before we start with the present, let's go back in time. And in the 1930s, a dark joke was told about a rabbi in Germany who was reading the Nazi paper called Der Stürmer. A congregant came up to him, astonished, and said, "Rabbi, how can you be reading that Nazi rag filled with libels of the worst kind? Are you some kind of masochist or, God forbid, a self-hating Jew?" "On the contrary," the rabbi responded, "when I used to read the Jewish papers, all I learned about were pogroms, riots in Palestine, and assimilation in America. But now that I read Der Stürmer, I see that the Jews control all the banks, we pull all the strings in the art world and cinema, and that we're on the verge of taking over the entire world, you know, it makes me feel a whole lot better. While we are thankfully not living in 1930s Germany, this dark joke offers a reminder of what the state of world Jewry was less than a century ago. And while echoes of those ideas may unfortunately still be present today, it's important to begin by recognizing how far our global community has come. For all of the challenges of this moment, we are living in a very different world than our ancestors. Yes, anti-Semitism is more visible today. Yes, voices of hate and prejudice are growing louder across the globe. And yes, there are legitimate reasons for concern. But when we consider the situation of world Jewry, it's important to recognize that our current context isn't all that bad. The creation of the State of Israel changed the equation for the global Jewish community. The experience of the Holocaust shifted dynamics within the Christian world and led to the rejection of anti-Jewish tropes and ideas which had once been mainstream in the church. And in most parts of the globe, with Jewish communities, they maintain good relations with political and civic leaders to ensure that the community is a valued and protected part of their societies. I remember hearing Rabbi Danny Freelander speak in 2015 as the then head of the World Union for Progressive Judaism. His basic message, which still rings true today, is that extremist politics is never good for the Jews. It doesn't matter whether you're on the right or the left of the political spectrum. We unfortunately know all too well that the extreme right and the extreme left tend to unite around one subject: their dislike of Jews. While they come to their anti-Jewish positions from very different assumptions, they end up as peculiar bedfellows in their attacks and challenges to the Jewish community. Today, globally, the growing extremism in political discourse, not just here in America, but in many parts of the world, is unfortunately a cause for concern for our Jewish communities. While we can debate and discuss the different ways that they relate to the Jewish community, what is clear is that extremism is not good, and extremism today is on the rise. When the democratic center is threatened, the Jewish community is, by extension, also under threat. And the rise in extremism can even be seen today in the case of Israeli politics. The current Israeli government is the most extreme in her 75-year history. This is an ultra-Orthodox, extreme right-wing coalition. Parties who were once considered too extreme to be included in the government now hold ministerial positions. The most obvious example is Itamar Ben-Gvir, the leader of Otzma Yehudit, which translates as the Jewish Power Party. He is a disciple of the late Meir Kahane, who was once banned from Israeli politics. And he is just one of the extremist voices in that coalition. The reforms that they are currently suggesting and pushing forward in the Israeli judicial system are in line with the anti-democratic movements in countries like Turkey and Hungary. The state of Israel today is at a dangerous inflection point, and it is not clear how she will emerge from this moment of crisis. Given that Israel is home to the largest Jewish population, we cannot ignore what is happening there as we consider the state of world Jewry. The pessimist would warn that the current government holding a majority can really do anything that they want, while the optimist might suggest that this has caused an awakening in Israel as people take to the streets to protest on a weekly basis and to assert their commitment to Israel as a democratic country. It's not clear how this story will end yet. And what happens in Israel has ripples and affects the entire global Jewish community. In 2019, President Isaac Herzog, who was then the chair of the Jewish Agency, addressed the URJ biennial on the subject of challenges facing global Judaism. To his mind, the primary challenge was how do we prevent an irreversible rift between the two major communities of Israel, with 7 million Jews, and North America, with 7 million Jews. This was 4 years ago. And if anything, the divide between our two communities has only grown in the intervening years. I don't think that we here give enough attention to the fact that a thriving, vibrant, democratic Israel is actually a source of strength for the American Jewish community. The current political turmoil there has an effect on all of us. And while we cannot allow it to diminish our love for the people and the land of Israel, it's complicated. How do we relate to an Israeli government with ministers who hurl the most vicious insults at our stream of Judaism? How do we respond to coalition members who propose hateful policies against minorities? And how do we understand a government that seeks to undermine Israel's democratic foundations? There are ripples across the globe from what is happening in Israel. And over her 75 years of existence, generally, Israel has been an undeniable source of strength for world Jewry. But it's also clear that in recent years, the way that the extreme left relates to her has complicated that dynamic. In Britain, when Jeremy Corbyn became the leader of the Labour Party, he would frequently criticize the state of Israel and associate with terrorist organizations such as Hezbollah and Hamas. The rhetoric he used to criticize the state of Israel would often be anti-Semitic in nature, and he often slipped from criticizing Israel to criticizing Jews. And with Mr. Corbyn as the leader, he also attracted others from the extreme left to the Labour Party. The second largest party in British politics became a place that did not welcome Jews, and Jewish members left in their droves. It offers us a cautionary tale about the way in which anti-Israel attitudes by some on the extreme left can eventually develop into full-blown anti-Semitism. In his book, Jews Don't Count, David Baddiel wrote about the way that Jews are treated in British society, and I think it resonates in much of the world. His basic premise is that Jews don't fit neatly into the boxes that people want to put us in. While acknowledging that there are many Jews of color, he suggests that Jews are often viewed as Schrodinger's whites. They are white or non-white, depending on the politics of the observer. The extreme right stresses that we are not white, and the extreme left pushes the myth of the supposed power of the Jews and imagines that we are the very epitome of being white. In the British Labour Party under Corbyn, Jews were considered part of the elite white society and were therefore part of the problem. The good news is that despite several difficult years, Jeremy Corbyn was eventually replaced as leader, and there was a thorough investigation into this sorry period. His anti-Semitism was even an issue nationally at the general election, at which his party was resoundingly defeated. And thankfully, his successor has made a priority of repairing relations with the Jewish community. So what is the state of world Jewry today? It remains complicated. In the aftermath of the Holocaust, with the birth of the State of Israel, I think it's fair to say that the second half of the 20th century was very good for world Jewry. We re-established our homeland, with Israel as the plucky underdog making the desert bloom. Across the globe, people were sadly aware of where anti-Semitism could lead, and so the Jews were largely protected. And despite the horrors of the Holocaust, in that second half of the century, we could see Jewish life across Europe re-emerging and re-establishing itself, especially after the fall of the Iron Curtain. The last 20 years or so have been more difficult, but that's against the backdrop of a world that has changed. And today we must be aware of rising levels of anti-Semitism, threats to the state of Israel, and we haven't even begun to talk about the internal challenges which the Jewish community faces. But we need to gain perspective and remember what was going on just under 100 years ago. Because if we could go back to 1930s Germany and tell the people about the Jewish community in America and thriving Reform synagogues like the one you have here and across this country, if we could tell them about the state of Israel and what has been established there in Start-up Nation, and if we could talk about all of those European Jewish communities that are re-establishing, re-engaging, and re-emerging, they'd be pretty impressed at where the Jewish community is today. And so, yes, we need to be vigilant. Yes, there is cause for concern. But overall, today, the state of world Jewry is very good, in my opinion. Shabbat Shalom.